There's a number quietly rising right now, and almost nobody is paying attention to it. Not oil prices, not inflation, not even interest rates. This number is different, because when it crosses a certain point, entire economies don't just slow down. They stall, factories stop expanding, energy projects freeze, technology growth hits a wall, and the strange part, it all comes down to a metal most people never think about: copper. By 2027, the world is expected to need more copper than it can physically produce. Not slightly more, massively more. And when that gap opens, it won't just affect one industry. It will hit everything. From the electricity in your home to the car you drive to the global economy itself. Because copper isn't just another commodity. It's the system behind the system. And that system is starting to break. One, the invisible backbone. To understand how serious this is, you have to understand what copper actually does. Copper is not flashy. It's not rare like gold. It's not controversial like oil. It's invisible, but it's everywhere. Inside every wire in your home, inside every transformer, every power grid, every smartphone, every data center, copper is what makes electricity move. And electricity is what makes the modern world function. Without copper, power doesn't travel efficiently. And without efficient power, nothing scales. This is why copper has quietly become one of the most important materials on Earth. Not because it's valuable on its own, but because everything else depends on it. And now demand for that dependency is exploding. 2. The demand explosion. For decades, copper demand grew steadily, predictably, manageably. But that world doesn't exist anymore, because three massive forces are now accelerating demand at the same time. The first is the global push toward clean energy: solar farms, wind turbines, battery storage systems. All of them require huge amounts of copper. In fact, renewable energy systems use significantly more copper than traditional energy systems. So, as countries rush toward net zero targets, they're also rushing into a massive increase in copper consumption. The second force is electric vehicles. A traditional gasoline car uses a modest amount of copper, but an electric vehicle, it uses multiple times more. From the motor to the battery to the internal wiring. Now multiply that by millions of vehicles per year, and then add charging infrastructure on top of that. The third force is something most people overlook: global electrification. Developing countries are expanding their power grids. Cities are becoming smarter. Data centers are multiplying. AI systems, cloud computing, digital economies, all of it runs on electricity. And all of that electricity runs through copper. So what you get is a perfect storm. Three unstoppable trends, all demanding the same resource at the same time. And the supply side, it's not keeping up, not even close. 3. The supply problem. At first glance, the solution seems simple. If demand is rising, just produce more copper. But that's where the real problem begins, because copper is not easy to scale. The first issue is ore quality. Decades ago, copper deposits were rich. You could extract large amounts from relatively small volumes of rock. Today, those high-quality deposits are mostly gone. What remains is lower-grade ore, which means more digging, more processing, more cost for less output. The second issue is time. Opening a new copper mine doesn't take a year or two. It can take over a decade. Exploration, approvals, construction. By the time a mine becomes operational, the market has already changed. The third issue is resistance. Environmental concerns, local opposition, regulatory delays. Even when companies want to expand production, they often can't. And then there's geography. A large portion of the world's copper supply comes from a small number of countries, which means supply is not just limited, it's concentrated. And concentration creates risk. So even if the world knows a shortage is coming, it can't respond fast enough to stop it. 4. The breaking point. Now combine those two realities. Demand accelerating rapidly, supply struggling to keep up, and you reach a critical point. A gap, not a small imbalance. A structural shortfall. This is where things begin to change, because a shortage doesn't just mean higher prices, it means limited access. It means companies competing for the same material. It means delays, cancellations, prioritization, and eventually exclusion. Some industries will get what they need, others won't. And that's when the system starts to fracture, not suddenly, but gradually, until the pressure becomes impossible to ignore. 5. The domino effect. When copper becomes constrained, the impact doesn't stay contained. It spreads. First, energy projects. Renewable infrastructure depends heavily on copper. If supply tightens, projects slow down. Deadlines get pushed, costs rise. Then the automotive sector. Electric vehicles require large amounts of copper. If manufacturers can't secure supply, production slows, adoption slows, the entire transition slows. Then infrastructure. Power grids need expansion to support modern demand, but expansion requires copper. Without it, growth hits a ceiling. And then technology. Data centers, electronics, connectivity systems all depend on reliable electrical systems, which depend on copper. So what starts as a resource constraint becomes a system-wide limitation. And the more interconnected the world becomes, the more severe that limitation feels. 6. The economic shock. Now scale that across entire economies. When a foundational resource becomes scarce, costs rise. Not just for one product, for everything connected to it. Energy becomes more expensive. Infrastructure becomes more expensive. Manufacturing becomes more expensive. And those costs don't disappear. They get passed on to businesses, to governments, to consumers. This creates inflation pressure. But unlike typical inflation, this kind can't be easily controlled because you can't print more copper. At the same time, growth slows, projects are delayed, investments become uncertain, supply chains become unstable. And then comes competition. Countries begin securing resources more aggressively, trade tensions increase, strategic alliances shift, because access to copper becomes access to growth itself.